Okay, good evening, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and a distinct honor to welcome our speaker tonight, Dr. Thomas Bagger, Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to Italy, for this extremely interesting and timely lecture organized by the Guarini Institute of Public Affairs entitled 2026, a year of opportunity for Germany and Italy in the midst of geopolitical changes. After studying international relations in Munich, Paris, and Washington, D.C., Ambassador Bagger joined the German diplomatic service in 1992 and served in Prague, Ankara, and Washington. From 2017 to 2022, he acted as foreign policy advisor to Federal President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, and after serving as German ambassador to Poland, he served as the State Secretary of the Federal Foreign Office of Germany from August 23 to August 25, after which he became ambassador to Italy. The relations between Germany and Italy go back a long time. In fact, the gaining of independence by Italy and Germany in the 19th century revealed a surprising and profound intertwining in the destinies of the two countries, both from an ideological and from a strategic point of view, as they followed parallel political trajectories. Both nations were the result of the political, diplomatic, and military skills of two exceptional historical figures, Camillo Benso di Cavour and Otto von Bismarck, who at different times managed, through bold diplomatic and military maneuvers, to overcome seemingly unsurmountable obstacles, creating two new states destined to have a profound influence on European political life. Cavour's brilliant work aroused admiration and envy among German intellectuals and politicians, who lamented the absence of a figure capable of uniting national forces around such an ambitious goal. However, this admiration turned to dismay at the news of the premature death of the great Piedmontese statesman. This loss occurred shortly before the rise of Otto von Bismarck, who with his Realpolitik succeeded in building the German Empire, generating admiration and fear throughout the rest of Europe. Yet, the connection between these two countries went far beyond mutual perceptions in the collective imaginations, manifesting clearly also at the strategic and diplomatic level. In fact, Cavour's far-sighted vision, who saw in Prussia a potential ally to balance the powers of France and Austria, echoed Bismarck's Prussian vision in a clear sharing of strategic interest. From their inception, therefore, Italy and Germany have been deeply influenced and conditioned by each other in good and bad times, in good and bad ways, following intertwined political and strategic paths that have shaped, for better or worse, the destinies of the two people in the following centuries. This intertwined destiny appears to be still important for the present and for the future, as the new international order, in the words of Mario Draghi today, worries more than the end of the old one. And we could not ask for a better analysis of these common interests and opportunities than our distinguished speaker today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Thomas Bagger. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I feel very high up here, so my wife would be more comfortable as a theater enthusiast to be here. I won't go back to Cavour and Bismarck, but Germany and Italy go back a long way, a long way indeed. And it's something I still learn about, because I have not grown up a specialist on Italy, and I came to Rome about 5 months ago. So most of it is still new. My first time at John Cabot University. Most of the places I go to, I admire Rome's beauty for the first time. But I would say it's always a good time to become ambassador to Italy. I'm sure my Danish colleague will concur. When you tell people at home that you're about to be posted to Rome, you are the subject of envy, almost invariably. I was joking and said maybe that's particularly true for a German. It's we commemorate 240 years of Goethe's famous Italian journey this year, and ever since, Italy has been what the Germans call ein Sehnsuchtsland, an Arcadia south of the mountains, a place of nostalgia, the place where the lemons blossom, as it says in one of his more famous poems. And to this day, interestingly enough, when I looked up some of the numbers, Germans form the largest group of foreign tourists coming to Italy every year. So there must be a reason for that. Now, I do have a message for you today that I will talk about. It's about the special moment that I think we have in German-Italian relations. But I'm happy to share also a few of my own observations on diplomacy, which has been my profession for 30 plus years in the places the president has mentioned. But one of the things I learned is that the art of diplomacy has a lot to do with good timing. And sometimes that is your own work and contributions. Sometimes you're just plain lucky because you come to a place at the right time. Negotiations are usually successful when mutual interests are well aligned. Or to put it differently, when interests are well aligned, it is relatively easy to expand the space for mutual cooperation. And one of the first German foreign ministers I worked for as a speechwriter in the late 90s, Joschka Fischer, he used to say, when things get fluid, you can shape them. It's much harder to change things simply because you feel that you have recognized something as being a good solution or a good policy. But if everything is settled and interests are firmly in place, it's very difficult to actually change a political landscape. And my argument tonight is that we have an alignment of interests and of politics between Berlin and Rome that we have probably not had in decades, and that 2026 promises to be truly a year of opportunity to take this long and storied relationship to a new level of cooperation, and one that will benefit the strength of a united Europe significantly. So I consider myself, even after only 5 months in Rome, a particularly lucky ambassador because I feel I'm in the right place at the right time. If I look at the broader context, there are a number of reasons for that, and I will mention a few and we can expand on them in the Q&A. But there's sort of a geopolitical landscape that you all follow, that you study, that worries you just as it worries Mario Draghi and others. And it starts with Russia, an increasingly revisionist, aggressive Russia, with Russia's war against Ukraine in 2022 that is still going on. in terms of duration, now having surpassed even the Great War of Russia, of the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany from 41 to 45. It is a changing relationship with China. China that is increasingly acting like a systemic rival, that is increasingly putting pressure on our economic systems, our business models, that has expanded its trade surplus last year to the incredible amount of 1.2 trillion euros. Germany has long had a more or less balanced trade with China over many years and has profited greatly from China's opening and China's rise, exporting products, machinery, cars, and so forth. Today, also the German trade with China is heavily lopsided in China's favor. And then, as we follow in the news every day, we're confronted with our most important ally that is more unpredictable than it has ever been, the United States of America. So the main pillars carrying Europe's prosperity and security over the last decades look more shaky today than at any point, I always say, in my lifetime, but you can sort of expand that if you want to the beginnings of the post-war order. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has repeatedly called this new era a new era of great power politics, very different from what Europeans imagined until recently, very different from what Europe has equipped itself for. And so the stark reality is that Europe is more on its own, left to its own devices, if you will, than it has been, not only in the happy 35 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of the Iron Curtain, and the unification of Europe in 1989, but really going back to the immediate post-war period. So there's an urgent need to adapt, to invest more into Europe's strength, from defense to technology and innovation, but also into reducing dependencies that we understood as being mutual dependencies for mutual benefit, and which have turned out in too many cases to be vulnerabilities that can be weaponized by others. The second part of that context in which I place the German-Italian relationship today is the European context. And when I think back to when the new German government took office on the 6th of May last year, 9 months ago, on his first day, the Chancellor traveled both to Paris and to Warsaw, to sort of the two closest allies, and France and in Poland, with a message that he wanted to energize that relationship that we call, among the three of them, the so-called Weimar Triangle, going back to an early meeting after the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1991 that took place in Weimar, but it's this Franco-German-Polish triangle. And he, clearly with the intention of energizing it as one of the engines of closer European cooperation in a challenging context. But the reality is that for all the personal relationship with President Macron and Prime Minister Tusk, both of these countries face enormous challenges domestically, a blocked political landscape at home, that I won't go into any broader detail, but it limits the ability to actually invest into major initiatives on the European level. You have seen it with the difficult French debate on free trade and the Mercosur agreement. You see it in Poland, where my colleague and friend Richard Schnepf, who's meant to be the Polish ambassador to Italy, is actually a chargé d'affaires because his own president refuses to sign his letters of credentials, fully accrediting him to the Quirinale. So for different reasons, two very important partners of Berlin that are limited in their ability to act. There's an E3 format, France, Germany, the UK, that is used time and again for policies towards Iran historically, but also in the Ukraine context, organizing support for Ukraine. But also when you look to Britain, no longer a member of the European Union, Prime Minister Starmer is struggling and fighting for his domestic political base at home. If you take these two broader sketches of the global environment and then the European context, Italy emerges as a partner of remarkable political stability and a clearly expressed commitment to work more, to be ready to work more with Germany. And at this moment, something happens that sort of produces a fresh perspective also from Berlin on Italy as a partner that not only takes sort of the broader political context into view, but many of the strengths, that the opportunities, the potential that Italy has to offer, and that sometimes we may have taken too much for granted. For me, one of the early observations where this hit me was that there was a phrase that I had rarely ever heard in Berlin, but that kept popping up in speeches by Italian politicians week after week. And it's the observation that Italy is actually the second industrial power in Europe and in the European Union. It's part of the documents that Germany and Italy signed at the summit that I will talk about, but it's usually something that the Italian side mentions, and then sort of trying to gauge the effect on the on a German audience. But if you look at it, it is true that especially the north of Italy, Piemonte, Lombardy, Veneto, Alto Adige, is extremely closely integrated financially, industrially, economically with southern Germany. It is almost an integrated economic region, and you can look at lots of examples of about, I think the estimate is about 1/5 of every car produced by BMW in Munich or in Stuttgart is made up of parts imported from Italy. The bilateral trade volume between Italy and Germany runs to an amazing 160 billion euros every year, and it's more or less a balanced trade. Italy has industrial and technological capacity where Europe needs it most at this moment of challenge, in space technology, in defense production. So when you look around, there's much more than food, fashion, Ferrari, as we sometimes say, or Italians say about themselves. But there's also far more than Italy just being sort of a contributor to products being manufactured in Germany. There's a lot of very capable high-tech companies, lots of very creative management in companies. And maybe most important of all, there's a very similar economic structure. A lot of the industrial and manufacturing base in the north is made up of small and medium-sized enterprises. It's not the Siemenses and the Leonardos or the Daimlers and Stellantis that actually make up the backbone of both our economies, but it's a myriad of small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, a lot of it family companies, which make Germany and Italy, in the way they interact economically, much more compatible than with most other countries in Europe. And then, not least, Italy is the second trading power, second largest trade surplus in the entire European Union. So a lot of the sort of gut reaction, but also policy response to the fraying of the international trading order, of threats with tariffs, of protectionist regulation, actually affects both of our countries in a similar way, which leads to a strong policy alignment also on many of the issues that are on the agenda in Brussels to be negotiated among the EU 27. And then finally, maybe at this point, something that I have learned about and that I found very interesting is the nature of the Italian relationship with the United States, politically, economically, but also emotionally, throughout a century and a half, maybe longer. But I'm not talking about the discovery of America. I'm talking about sort of the waves of emigration, the emotional bonds that exist, but also very strong political and economic ties that in many ways have reminded me of the way Germans or Germans of my generation think about the United States as in many ways the country that has shaped my own West Germany that I grew up in, and then United Germany after 1989-90. And so I think both these countries, not just as governments, but also as societies, are actually struggling in a somewhat similar way in coming to terms with the America we're actually confronted with today and finding a way forward. So this is my point about, or my 3 points about the context. Now, on January 23, 10 days ago, a Friday, we had what we call a government-to-government consultation, vertice bilaterale, a German-Italian summit here in Rome. So I consider myself also lucky because I already have likely the most challenging day of my year 2026 as ambassador in Italy behind me. We'll see what the year still has to offer. But something the Chancellor and Prime Minister Meloni agreed to very early when he came in, after visiting Paris and Warsaw, he came to Rome in the second week in office, and he agreed with Prime Minister Meloni that for all the reasons I've tried to lay out, it was actually worth trying to elevate our cooperation to a new level, and to try to push it with a new ambition. And the date they set was January 23, and that appointment was kept. There's months of work of an embassy that go into such a summit, preparing documents, a 20-page action plan, covering all the policy fields. We negotiated a second agreement, government agreement on deepening cooperation on security, defense, and resilience, with everything from cyber and critical infrastructure to armaments cooperation and space. There was a huge business forum with 400 companies from Germany and Italy represented that ran parallel during the whole day on January 23, all trying to inject energy into that cooperation and trying to build a new foundation that will guide us for the next 2 years. But also in that week, world politics had its role, because it was a pretty wild week, which began on the weekend before with President Trump's threats on Greenland, with the announcement of an extra 10% tariffs on 8 European countries, with his proposal for the Board of Peace, with an ambition that went far beyond the initially envisaged Gaza context. And so what we agreed on at the summit, which then took place on Friday, was the culmination of a week that saw Prime Minister Meloni in South Korea, I think on the Sunday before. Then she came back, then Davos. It was the week of the Davos meeting, where the Prime Minister in the end decided not to go and not to sign up to President Trump's Board of Peace, just as the German Chancellor, who did go and gave a speech, but did not sign up to the Gaza Board of Peace, and where the two, Meloni and Merz, met again on Thursday bilaterally in Brussels in the preparation for an emergency summit of the EU 27 leaders that was meant to spell out the proper reaction to the tariff threat and to the Greenland designs of President Trump. And so what happened in the end was that they flew in on Friday morning at 2:30, one after another, directly from Brussels to Ciampino Airport, had a short night of sleep, and then on that Friday went through the proceedings of the summit, signed the agreed documents. But above all, they felt that at the end of this week, they had achieved, through constant conversation and communication, a level of political sintonia, as I have learned, a level of alignment politically that produced an atmosphere around this bilateral summit that really made it extraordinary and something I have rarely witnessed before. And in an interesting way, this strong sense of alignment at the top, that Europe had to stand its ground in this week, and that was the message that should radiate from this bilateral summit. And it was much more than a bilateral affair. It was a deliberate effort to inject more strength into Europe and a European response in the face of all these geopolitical challenges that sort of radiated also to all the others who took part in that summit. And the Chancellor came with a delegation of 10 ministers, sort of 2/3 of his cabinet, basically covering the entire sort of all the policy fields relevant to such a close bilateral relationship: foreign affairs, defense, economy and trade, research, agriculture, culture, you name it. And they had their own bilateral meetings, they signed their own agreements, they sort of deepened their own relationships. So the second element that stuck with me beyond that, this sense of strong political alignment or sintonia, was really a sense of familiarità, a building of trust and personal relationship between political actors at the top level of all these ministries that, in all of my experience, is a critical ingredient of functional cooperation. Bureaucrats can do a lot of things. They can come up with good project ideas. They can sort of design meetings and formats and forums, but if you don't inject the political will from the top, you won't get very far. And this is something that I felt possibly has been lacking in the German-Italian relationship for many years. And there are reasons for that. Maybe because we looked elsewhere from Berlin, maybe because the volatility of Italian politics produced sort of new generations of counterparts too quickly to actually develop that sense of familiarità. But this is, I think, something where I could witness directly how the political stability that characterizes Italy in this period has a direct impact on the depth and the level of ambition that you can actually inject into such a summit, but also into the way that we will try to take from here. So I think overall, there is something I am very happy with, which is the willingness to take a fresh look from Berlin at Italy as a partner and at Italy's potential and its offers of cooperation across many fields. And I try to sort of, one of the reasons why I'm here and why I've agreed to do this tonight, to say this is not if we do this well, this is not a one-off event where on a Friday evening when your chancellor leaves and the plane takes off, you say, I've done my work, I'm a happy ambassador and I have a good team that managed to juggle these 10 ministerial delegations through a day of Rome traffic and into the splendor of the Villa Doria Pamphili for the official summit. But it's really the starting point for what could be an extraordinary year for Germany and Italy, because there are no national elections scheduled in Italy this year, none in Germany. There's a lot of outside pressure on Europe to deliver results quickly, a lot of urgency in the deliberations among EU leaders in Brussels. And these two countries have identified areas of cooperation and joint projects that they now have a full year to really get them on the road, implement and produce results, and not just joint papers. So there's already a lot behind me at the end of January or on the 2nd of February, but the year has in reality just begun. And when we think about this year, 2026, and Chancellor Merz in his remarks has alluded to that also at the summit, we also look back 75 years. In June 1951, Konrad Adenauer, as the first post-war Chancellor of West Germany, comes to Italy for the first time. Comes to Rome in June 1951 to connect with Alcide de Gasperi, who was the Italian Prime Minister at the time, and who became one of his most important partners in launching the process of European integration. But these are also, why does he come in June 51? Because Germany and Italy have just agreed to re-establish diplomatic relations after the horrors of the war. Took 6 years, from 45 to 51. I think sometime in the early days of April 51, the formalities are done, and then he comes in June 51. So it marks 75 years of a new beginning bilaterally, but at the same time very much a European beginning that culminated in the first integration of the six founding members. And I only read after this was discussed at the summit how strong, how contested this was at the time, with protests of the Italian Communist Party in the Camera dei Deputati against the first visit of a West German chancellor after the war, because these were days of the Cold War. This was not this was not an easy path. It was not a smooth path. It was something that was quite extraordinary at the time, and when we think about it, it remains quite extraordinary until today. Visits at the time played out in a very different way and at a very different pace than they do today. So I said Friedrich Merz flew in at 2:30 a.m. in the morning and he was gone by nightfall. Konrad Adenauer, when he came in June 1951, he stayed for an entire week. I don't know what the embassy felt about that, but he took the time also to go out to Tivoli and see the beauty of the Villa d'Este and the Villa Adriana, and he went to Rocca di Papa. He had an idea of what he where he wanted to connect and reconnect with Italy as part of the heart of Europe. Now we do this in half a day. It's a much more hectic way of doing diplomacy, but the ultimate aim, and if we do it well, the ultimate result is very much the same. I think if we use this opportunity well, this moment for Germany and Italy in their bilateral relationship, we can actually do much more than take our bilateral relationship to a new level, but really inject a spark of energy and optimism into the entire European project at a moment when it's urgently needed. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador. So let me say that we are twice grateful to you and the wonderful team at the German Embassy to accept our invitation and celebrate this new momentum of Italo-German relations here at John Cabot University. So it's a privilege, it's an honor, and in the contact I had with the staff at the embassy, I was particularly pleased to see how much time they were dedicating to us actually during the days that were before the very important visit of the Chancellor Merz here in Rome. So thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. And thank you also, President Pavoncello, for such an elegant introduction. And I need to thank also our wonderful media partner for Formiche. There is Emanuele Rossi here in the room, I think. And so thank you so much. Formiche published an insightful editorial written by the ambassador last weekend. That was a sort of like introduction to the event today. And last but not the least, I would like to thank also the wonderful team of the Guarini Center to put all this together. So before opening the floor for the Q&A, I would like to take the chance of my role as a chair to ask you the first question, which is something that I really like, the metaphor that Joshua Fisher used in terms of fluidity. I work on China, and the Chinese say that one of the best strategies to make yourself water in order to flow bypassing obstacles. So now, February 12, there is a very important leader meeting that has been convened by Antonio Costa, the President of the European Council, and this meeting is going to, of course, involve like the most important European leaders, together with Draghi and Enrico Letta, which are the true drafter, Italian, of the two most relevant report on the reform, of the potential reform that Europe needs in order to face the challenges of this time. Very important challenges indeed. So now my question to you is, how do you think that realistically that Italy and Germany can make themselves water and try to improve and reform in such a unique, as you mentioned, and challenging time, the structure of the European Union?
This is better. So I think there's a broader observation also to this question. We have, and it has played out in the recent debate on Mercosur, yes or no, good or bad, across the European Union. But I think there was an almost pervasive thought, certainly in my country, but I think also in Brussels, across many of the EU member states, that we would use our economic weight and potential as leverage to transform the world around us by concluding agreements that would set levels of standards, that would raise standards elsewhere. And because we were so attractive as a partner, that would be mutually beneficial. It would benefit us, but it would also benefit the others by raising their level of social, ecological, and otherwise sort of economic, political protection and standards. And what is happening, and happening I think more quickly than we all would have imagined and we thought possible, is that we realize that our leverage has become much smaller. And that there are lots of countries out there who are interested in relations with Europe, but more on their terms than on our terms, or on terms that are indeed negotiated by a give and take and not simply by underwriting what the Europeans feel should be the standard elsewhere. So I think that's the broader context, which requires a difficult adaptation in the way we look at the world out there, that we're no longer the missionary that goes out and says, here is what you all should believe and what you all should do, but we become rather like a monastery, as my friend Ivan Krastev has said and written, where what we focus on is to keep the rules intact within our own walls, if you will, within our own territory, because we lack the power and the leverage to actually transform the world out there. So that's the broad observation. The second, more specifically, this leaders' retreat on the 12th of February, where the EU 27 heads of state and government will assemble to focus on what do we need to do to regain an edge in European competitiveness. Sort of there's a regulatory, maybe even deregulatory, debureaucratization component to that, making it easier for companies to produce, to finance themselves, to innovate. But there's also an industrial policy component to that. How do we foster innovation? How do we encourage startup companies to actually stay in Europe and not look for their finances in the US because it's easier to get, or for sort of staff to hire elsewhere because they're not available in Europe. So there's a whole range of very practical questions, and you're right. Enrico Letta and Mario Draghi, as former Italian prime ministers, have, I think, done Europe a great service by trying to pinpoint in more detail what are the construction sites, where have we slipped, where do we limit our own potential by regulatory hurdles, financing hurdles, by fragmentation, by a less than complete single market. Because the reality is that if we want to hold our ground as Europeans, the basis of our strength has always been our economic strength. And when we talk about we need to invest more also into our military capabilities and our ability to defend ourselves in order to sort of to build a credible deterrence in order to prevent an attack from outside. All of this needs an economic base, and it is that economic base that has been slipping. My own country is is now in its, well, it is sort of grown 0.3% in the last quarter of 2025, but essentially we've been stuck in 3 years of recession, something Germany has not experienced after the war, and that's a long time. So no one in Germany has experienced that type of economic slump that we're in. And the Chancellor himself, he knows very well that his chances of re-election in the end will not depend on foreign policy, even if this is a fluid world where we sort of discuss war and peace every day. It will depend on whether he's able to re-energize the German economy. And because we are the country we are, heavily manufacture-oriented, heavily export-oriented, our most important frame of reference is the European Union. And most of these regulations that cover our economic activity, yours and that of the other 25, is European regulation. And so that will be at the core of that meeting, but not only of that meeting, it will be at the core of, I think, what the 27 will try to do in the year and in the years ahead.
Thank you so much. So now we can open the floor. So I suggest we collect 3 questions at a time. So please raise your hand, introduce yourself. We start from Federico Argentieri, the director of the Guarini Institute. Please, let me.
Thank you very much. Good evening again, Ambassador, and thank you for coming. I have a few undiplomatic questions, if you forgive me. What is your, if you may, of course, what are your thoughts about current attempts at making NATO ineffective, number one, at basically destroying the United Nations, admittedly? And what is your take regarding the dangers that our country, your country, France, the United Kingdom, and possibly also Spain, the dangers that they have in front of them of anti-democratic pro-Russian forces taking the upper hand in the government? I'm just to be crystal clear, I'm speaking of the likes of Salvini and 5 Stelle in Italy, of Alternative für Deutschland in Germany, of Madame Le Pen and Monsieur Bardella in France, of whatever the name of the neo-fascist party is in Vox in Spain, and last but not least, Mr. Farage in the UK. Do you reckon that democratic forces, or at least pro-Europe and Atlantic forces, are capable of resisting the offensive, honestly? Thank you. And I apologize again for the non-diplomatic nature. I disappointed my parents very long ago who wanted me to be a diplomat. So I hope I'm not disappointing you. Thank you.
Thank you, Federico. So that was already 3 questions, but we can add one more by Francesco Lapenta. Do you mind to join the Q&A? Okay, and then maybe we let the ambassador reply.
Hi, I'm Francesco Lapenta. I'm the director of the Institute of Future Innovation Studies here at John Cabot University. So everybody talks about superpowers and the new geopolitics of superpowers, no? But something that I notice in reality is the personalization of power. So you have Trump, you have Putin, you have Xi Jinping, you have Erdogan. But Europe has a very different model. We don't really allow to have one person to stand out. So you have this kind of somewhat competition between who we should listen to, and they are really fighting sometimes for dominance. Macron is really trying his best to dominate in terms of innovation, creating leadership in different programs. Do you see anything where our two leaders, where Meloni and Merz, can actually capitalize on a unique quality of the link between Germany and Italy and lead Europe in some dimension. What is that unique relation that you're talking about between Italy and Germany that can be capitalized by our leaders to lead? Because if there is one thing that in Europe probably is missing, is communication. The Americans are really communicating really well what they want to achieve. The same China, the same Russia, but Europe seems to be squeezed in deciding not so much the power we have. We have a ton of power. We displayed it a few days ago with the attack on Greenland and Denmark. We pulled out 1.3 trillions of relations with great impact. We do have leverage, we do have capital, but perhaps we don't have a vision. So what are our two leaders have in common, and what vision can they bring forward?
It's very tempting, but it's. I'll try to be brief on that. I think part of the challenge that we face as Europeans, and I say that very much as a German, because I think our one of the things that strike me when I watch Italian debates, Italian politics in these early half a year that I'm here, is that for all the challenges, and there are plenty also for Italy, the public mood is actually much better than in Germany. I'm struck whenever I go back every, 6 weeks to Berlin, and it's not only because the winter is darker and colder than in Rome, but there's a defensiveness in the public debate that I find stunning. And this contrast here in Italy, I find a relief, even though it's not perfect. But I say that as an illustration for, I think, a bigger European problem, that we feel we discuss our own role in the world and what is coming at us very much in a defensive way. And there's a reason for that, of course, because we feel that somehow we won the last game, and it was good for us. And especially for my country, we wanted to believe in the end of history, because we were finally on the right time of history, on the right side of history after 1989, and we were actually very happy that history after 1989 was no longer made by important leaders, but rather shaped by structures, seemingly inevitable trends that would take the toxic nature of charisma out of politics. Something very appealing to a country that sort of has suffered from one of the worst iterations of human charisma and catastrophe throughout human history. So there was something deeply appealing to this notion of an order that was almost impersonal and that did not depend on individual leaders doing the right thing. And so I think to discover that this has changed now, and that this is not entirely new phenomenon. I mean, if you think of Carlyle, who wrote about sort of man makes history, not structures, not powers, not abstract things, but individual human beings make history. We've moved away from that, and now we move again in that direction. And it's not the European way, as you said. We will never, as 27, we will always be deliberative, and we cannot turn on a dime and take a decision from now to the next moment and then back an hour later. It's not how we work. If you think about it, how Donald Trump sort of climbed down from his Greenland tree in Davos on Wednesday evening, there was a brief discussion whether EU leaders should actually hold their emergency summit on Thursday, but sort of try to pull 27 heads of state and government in one place in a matter of days. It's a challenge. And once you've done it, you don't call it off because someone else has turned and walked off in a different direction, but you don't know what he's going to do the next day. So we will need to keep our own modus operandi, not that it cannot be improved, but it will be different from sort of charismatic, solitary figures. And I think we should not give up our empirically informed conviction that that is in the end a superior way to organize a society and maybe even to organize in international order. And I think the same sort of defensiveness I also found about some of the issues you raised, future of the United Nations, future of an alliance as successful as NATO. So how are we able to articulate a European idea of where we want to go, and not only to react and be on the defensive and say, this should not be damaged, that should not be destroyed, this should not be taken away from us. I think that is part of the challenge. And because, and now I speak again as a German, because we believed we had figured out the future and it was ours, we feel particularly challenged now that we feel somehow our idea of the future slipping away from us. And I feel that is the biggest challenge for political leaders also in our countries, to articulate a compelling idea of the future. Compelling. Something they, as politicians, they can actually convey to a younger generation that says, weren't things better yesterday? So this toxic notion that somehow the past was superior to what is ahead of us, I think that's one of the big struggles for Europe. Now, final point on the sort of what is it that Germany and Italy and the two leaders can bring to the table. Enrico mentioned the joint paper, Meloni-Merz, for the leaders' retreat on the 12th of February. But I think this sort of trying to raise awareness of where our strength comes from, and that our strength as Germany and Italy has a lot to do with our creativity, the genius of our engineers over the decades, our manufacturing backbone of our economies, and to try to translate that into the new age, because it will no longer be the machines of the past. But it is not written anywhere that European startups can't be successful, and that you cannot build excellent semiconductors or large language models in Europe. There are challenges to that. There are financing challenges, maybe even a mental challenge in terms of speed compared to a Chinese or an American Silicon Valley environment. But I think to sort of try to inject that sense of optimism and the relevant political and economic instruments, I think that is a task for Italy and Germany. Among others, there will be others who will join us in that effort in Brussels, but I think it's only fitting that these two countries take the lead for some of the reasons I've mentioned. Large and integrated industrial manufacturing sectors, lots of high-tech engineers, lots of good universities, good polytechnicos, and if we can do something there, I think we do a service for Europe to get out of this defensive pessimist slump.
Thank you very much. Let's try to get some questions from those that actually belong to the future, our students. Please, we have one here, one there. Okay, one each. Please, introduce yourself. Zelia, can you pass the mic?
Thank you. Good evening,
Okay,
Mr. Ambassador.
Sorry, Francesca, no, I didn't see you. Okay, you go first, and then we have one in front of you. Apologize.
Okay.
Yes. No, you, Francesca, you go first. You go first.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Ambassador. I'm Francesca Perrone. I'm a graduate student in international affairs here at John Cabot University. And I would like to go back to the concept of competitiveness that both Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Chancellor Merz stressed at the governmental summit. So they said that this competitiveness should be achieved basically through simplification of bureaucracy and basically deregulation. So I would like to ask you, to what extent do you think that this concept of competitiveness is compatible with the European Union's sustainability goals? Do you think that the EU sustainability goals at this point are purely ideological, as Giorgia Meloni suggested at the summit?
Okay, then can you pass the mic in front? Mos, you go first, and then you pass. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much. Yeah, my question is about sustainable futures, not just the current year of opportunity. How can Italy and Germany, if not Europe later, following, I mean, we just spoke about bureaucracy, maintain the needed momentum in bilateral and multilateral agreements when the next US administration comes to be in 2028? How can Europe ensure not falling back into comfort of provided security architectures and mobilize sustainable political will for the future? How do you mobilize youth to be politically active and engaged? Thank you.
So one here, and then we close with the Arman, okay? We collect 4. Is around.
Good evening, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Beatrice. I'm an undergraduate student at JCU. And I was wondering, between the situation with Russia and Ukraine and the current Trump administration's highly negative rhetoric towards multilateral institutions, but particularly NATO, how do you see the future of all of the Euro-Atlantic community organizations, but particularly NATO? How do you see the future of NATO evolving or changing moving forward with the current global situation?
In fondo.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you to John Cabot University for organizing this event. My name's Herman Singh. I'm an alumnus of John Cabot and a master's student in Mediterranean security at Lewis. I have 2 short questions for you. One, could you speak a little bit onto yourself as a diplomat, but other diplomats you engaged with, the reactions to Mark Carney's speech at Davos, particularly on the level of looking at values-based realism and different geometric relations for confronting the challenges that we face today? And the second part is the historic, let's say, engagement with the EU to fully realize that security and energy capacities has always been an engagement with the Mediterranean region in general, whether that's North Africa or the Gulf region, that came in with the Barcelona process and the Union for the Mediterranean. How do you see the Mediterranean role as part of broader EU geopolitical and geoeconomic strategy being re-engaged now that we have the current situation? Thank you.
Thank you. Lots to keep us busy for the rest of the evening. On the first question, on the competitiveness concept, if you will, if you look at the Italian-German paper, it has a simplification and deregulation component, but it is not limited to that. Just as the Draghi and Letta reports are much more comprehensive in trying to address the shortcomings and weaknesses of the single market that we need to address. But clearly there's a debate going on. It's a debate I've witnessed here in Rome in November, where we have an annual format of the 3 big industrial federations, the BDI of Germany, MEDEF of France, and Confindustria, and you listen to the company representatives and sort of what they see as a problem. And I think you can argue that there is an ideological fight going on how much to keep of the Green Deal and how far to go back and to deregulate. But I think there are also lots of practical considerations where you simply need to take into account sort of competitive situations as we face them with China. They're not abstract. They're very concrete for a lot of our companies in Europe. And there are some regulatory responses to that, but also some industrial and innovation responses to that. There's a whole agenda on trying to better mobilize capital for European innovation and entrepreneurial effort, and to, if you will, limit the outflow of European capital potential to the United States, not by regulatory measures, but by offering competitive investment opportunities and investment environment. A lot of that money flows to America, fueling American innovation, sometimes with European ideas. And I think that is something we need to address. So I think all of that is part of the German-Italian input. All of that should be part of the European debate, not only on the 12th of February. But I also agree that there will be a sometimes tense debate on sort of the speed and the scale of the green transformation and the decarbonization of our economy and our society, and about the costs and the benefits of it. But I think it's not. I think that goes back to something I tried to say earlier. We cannot sort of construct our own world without taking the world around us into view and into account, and to assess what it's doing to us. And if we don't have the leverage to transform the world in our image, we do better to recognize reality as it is out there, and to adapt our own policies and our own behavior, sometimes along the timeline, sometimes in a more drastic way. On the second question, including on how to mobilize youth, I'm glad I'm a diplomat and not a politician, so I can say what is needed is a compelling idea of the future. I'm not the one who has to sell it or who has to develop it, because I do think it's a daunting challenge. But one of the things, because I'm a generation older than many in the room here, one of the things that struck me and it struck me late actually, because I was 24 when the wall fell, I did not see it happen. I was a graduate student in international relations, and I was sitting in a computer lab in Washington, D.C., and I had American friends coming into the lab, because there were no cell phones and no laptops at the time, so we were sitting on the campus hacking in our computers, and they said, "Thomas, they're taking the wall down, they're taking the wall down." And I sat there as a student of the Cold War, and I said, these crazy Americans, they must have gotten something wrong, because they can't possibly talk about this wall, not about our wall dividing my own country. And it was a lack of imagination. It had always been there, and it looked immovable, impossible to wish away, to think away. And 20 years later, I was struck by the way in which our human mind collectively in Germany had transformed this most unexpected experience of my entire lifetime into a level of certainty that after that we had figured out where history would go. And it went in our direction: parliamentary democracy, social market economy, sustainable transformation. How could we be so certain? And then we were shocked when things went off in a very different direction, with the financial crisis, with Brexit, with the election of Donald Trump, with Russia's war against Ukraine, with the re-election of Donald Trump. And now that our hopes and our optimism has somehow evaporated because the world no longer conforms to our expectations. Now we think, now we figured it out. Everything is going downhill. But that's not true. It's not true, just as it was not true that we had figured it out before. It's not the way history works. It sometimes works through great figures. It sometimes works through technological innovations. It sometimes works through its own quirks and turns. The reality is, and I say that sort of trying to reflect a collective sentiment of Germans, the future is far more open than we are comfortable with. But it is open. It is fluid. It's far more fluid than it used to be when I grew up, or that I thought when I grew up. But it is ours to shape. And that's not easy. And we'll struggle with it, just as we struggle in when I come to your question on Russia, Ukraine, and how do we deal with the future of NATO. Well, what do we do as Europeans? We're trying to invest into our own strength with a sense of urgency. We're trying to reduce our own vulnerabilities. We're trying to win new partners in Southern America, in India, in Indonesia, and elsewhere that are like-minded on some issues, less so on others. We're doing all of that, knowing full well that we're not in a position to replace the United States and its security guarantee until tomorrow or until next year. So what do? We do what we need to do, which is to invest into our own strength, because we realize that we're more on our own than we've ever been. But we're also playing for time at the same time. We're trying to keep a balance. And I think one of the things the Italian Prime Minister and the German Chancellor did very well in this week leading up to the summit, to the bilateral summit, was to exactly try to find that fine line of saying, wait a minute, here the US president crosses a line that cannot happen without a firm response, but not to escalate, not to say the transatlantic relationship is over, it's a thing of the past. I think it would be foolish politically for us to do that. And that takes me to the Mark Carney question. It was a remarkable speech, great to watch, great to listen to. Honestly, I particularly like the start of the speech, which is his reference to Moc bez mocny, The Power of the Powerless, one of the famous books of Václav Havel. Prague was my first foreign posting when Havel was still president of the Republic. What a figure, what a sort of moral authority in the country who had helped bring about the end of communism in Czechoslovakia. And able to speak truth, to see truth and to speak it from the experience of his own society. Something I think Mark Carney used to great effect. But then as a European, my answer would also be, Canada is in a very different situation than we are. Canada does not have an existential security problem. Who would dare to attack Canada as a direct neighbor of the United States under the current circumstances? So he is spelling out, I think, a lot of good ideas on how middle powers should work together and not give up on the idea of a rules-based cooperation and order. But he's doing that, of course, from a position of much less existential risk than most European countries that are faced with an aggressive Russia and an ongoing war in Ukraine and an existential security and nuclear guarantee from the United States. So we will need to find a different balance. And I think that was on display in that week, in that last week of January. And we're well advised to sort of look at our own situation and not just at abstract ideas that sound wonderful, but will lead us into even bigger trouble. And then final point on your Africa and Gulf perspective, and including on the energy section. It's one of the things that I found tempting as a diplomat to come to Italy And as a diplomat, I grew up sort of with my back to the east. I learned French in school. I traveled France up and down by bicycle. I studied in France. I went to the United States. The wall fell when I was in Washington. When I came back, the East was open to me, and I said, this had always been here, and I didn't even know about it. So a large part of my 20 years, my first 20 years, was spent in and on Central Europe as something that has a lot to do with Germany. And I have an idea what Berlin looks like from Paris or Washington. I have an idea what it looks like from Prague or Warsaw. I never had an idea what it looks like from the south. So being ambassador to Italy now, for me, has two great sort of curiosities. One is the southern perspective, and that is, as you said, Northern Africa, the Gulf region, the Mediterranean region as Italy's region. What is that to Italy, and what does it make for a perspective on the world and on international politics for Italy? Because it's different than my German perspective, but also different than the one I had come to appreciate in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe. And the second element is to turn around and look north from Rome and to say, what does Berlin actually look like? What is Germany to Italy, or through Italian eyes? What is Brussels and this European Union for Italy? Because it's something different than it is for my country at the center of Europe. But that is the beauty. But I think as a diplomat, is you discover a new perspective and you try to understand how that changes the way Italians think about the world, they think about Europe, they think about their neighbors. And then you turn it, if you're good, you can turn it into something common and something productive. One of the elements in this German-Italian action plan is sort of a focus on Italy as an energy bridge from Northern Africa. It's about a corridor, including a pipeline corridor, that eventually should become a hydrogen southern corridor, transporting clean hydrogen all the way to the industrial centers in Germany. So that's a joint project. It's not a bilateral project. It's a pentalateral 5-country project that we're trying to push forward. There's a whole debate in Italy about the India, Middle East, Europe corridor that sort of makes new use of the Mediterranean. Great port cities of Italy like Trieste and Genova that have been slumbering more or less for decades, but that may be revived because that becomes a logistical corridor that will regain in importance, connecting Europe to the dynamic economic and technological centers of the Middle East and the Far East. So but that is something I grow into slowly. Some of this potential we discover, but as I said, some of these ideas are rather fancy, or they have a long time horizon. Would you actually invest in them also politically? Well, you would, if political leaders have a way to talk to each other, that they take each other seriously, and they feel that they have a partner also for longer term commitments. And so I come back to something I tried to say earlier, that part of the charm of this moment is a realization in Berlin that there may be a partner in Italy that we can build something with over the longer term, and not just manage the crisis of the day in Brussels or between capitals.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We have still a few minutes left if there are more questions. Yes, please.
Good evening, Ambassador. My name is Michael Müller. I'm a fellow German with a British passport living in Italy, so a staunch European. I'm also an entrepreneur. sitting on the board of startup, scale-up tech companies in Europe and in the UK. If you will allow me one observation and one question. First of all, I think your job must be incredibly hard right now as a diplomat, where most of the diplomacy internationally is happening in real time, and you're only one truth social post away from the next headline and the topic of the week, and communication between leaders is published, and I think that must make it very hard for people to work behind the scenes to keep the message out there. The question that I have is, and I think you gave us some of that, and that is the historical perspective, but also a sense of more positivity that we've seen lately. What can politicians, what can diplomats, what can the establishment do to bring back more positivity when it comes to the cause of Europe, when it comes to entrepreneurs, when it comes to the chances of many of the people here in the room to find a great job, to have a good future? Sustainability was mentioned. So I think some of that gets drowned out right now by the daily noise of the headlines that we're seeing from the US, from Russia, from China, from everywhere. So what do you think can be done to reverse this and basically paint a picture, not a naive picture, but a realistic picture of a more positive future?
Thank you very much. If there are some other questions, we can collect them now. Otherwise, yes, we have one more there.
Hello, Ambassador. Thank you both for your time as well as for your words. My name is Sam Pasiri. I am a double degree student here at John Cabot, as well as with the University of San Diego back in the United States. I suppose my question would just be, given geopolitics and given, the degree of which we've talked about everything tonight, as well as the world with artificial intelligence and, political powerhouses and figureheads as a whole, what simply would just be your advice to us as students who are, studying international relations or international business, both, I guess, ethically and intellectually, and are going to be inheriting the workforce as well as the politics in the coming years? How would you advise for us to be thinking about our studies as well as our entrance into, the coming future? Thank you.
Yeah, two easy questions to end the evening. Then, I don't know whether diplomacy is so incredibly hard. When I was a student your age at the University in Munich in the mid-80s, most of us actually wanted to write and to become journalists. And when I think of that and of my own sort of choice at the time, go to a newspaper, write for Der Spiegel or the Süddeutsche Zeitung, I find I made the better choice, because in many ways diplomacy has been transformed over these 40 years, 35 years, but the business model is very much intact. I wish the same could be said for today's journalism. It's much more challenging. Not that the need is no longer there. It's, we all need informed opinion and reliable information, but the business model has largely disappeared. You can see it in Italy, you can see it in Germany, you can see it everywhere. And it's I think part of the challenge you will allude to. So the only time I really felt that my job was really hard was during COVID. Because in the end, it is about people. It is sort of you want to convince people of something, you want to know something, you want to sort of, it's a matter of communication. And there are all kinds of quips of sort of what a good diplomat is or isn't, or how he does his job. But I felt up until now And as I said earlier, now I consider myself particularly lucky because I do believe I'm in the right place at the right time. There's no greater pleasure than that for a diplomat, that it is a great profession. But that doesn't take anything away from the challenges you mentioned, like an Emmanuel Macron who tries to have a sort of confidential proposal for a US president who then puts it on Truth Social the next day, trying to maximally embarrass his counterpart, is a huge problem. It's a huge, but it's not only a challenge for diplomats, it's a challenge for a head of state who has to find a way to maintain channels of communication that have become unpredictable. So on that, I will only say part of the assets of Prime Minister Meloni, but also Chancellor Merz, is that they still have a functional channel of communication with a US president that not everyone else has on the European landscape. And that is, none of us knows for how long and how reliably, but that is an incredibly important asset in these times. On the positivity, I don't have an answer to that. It's, I mean, I analyze, I can describe it, I can compare it, but one of the things that I found striking is there was a recent poll of the European Council on Foreign Relations in a number of countries around the world, sort of the US, Russia, China, some of the BRICS countries, South Africa, India, Brazil, and some of the European countries. And it's just fascinating to see that all these populations look at Europe as a very capable power in the world of tomorrow, except the Europeans. So to me, we can discuss endlessly on the sources of power, economic, military, technological, financial, and so forth. But this is something that happens in the minds of people. It's an imagination thing, or a lack of imagination. And I also don't have a good answer to your question. What should you do with your life? The simplest answer I can give you, but it's one of deep conviction, is try to find what you're really curious about and do that, because you will always be good at that, and probably better than many others. Don't try to do something because it is fashionable or advertised or well paid, supposedly. Do something. Life is, if you're lucky, it's a pretty long stretch. And once you fall into routine because you're no longer curious, it can become pretty tedious. There are few sights sorrier than a diplomat who's lost his curiosity, because then there's nothing new you're interested to discover in a new country. Italy is beautiful, but it's sort of only if you want to understand it, discover it, it will offer you everything it has to offer. And but this, I think this curiosity about a world that has always been difficult is maybe more challenging for us Europeans today than it was at any point in the last decades. But it's still a wonderful place with lots of wonderful people. And I'm sometimes struck, and that goes back to the positivity point. Do I actually believe that this supposedly great power, aggressive Russia has anything to offer, anything attractive to offer to its citizens? Do I believe that the Chinese Communist Party really has something more attractive to offer to its 1.4 billion people than we on this continent? And for all the economic dynamism and the individual opportunities that the United States offers in its universities, its companies, its tech entrepreneurs, Do I believe that they have a superior idea of how we should live together or organize our society? No, I don't. I can see plenty of challenges in our own societies and in Europe, but that's something we can work on, and we have mechanisms to work on that. So I think I think it's not as simple as to just say we need to believe in our strength, but to believe that in this more open future that we're facing now, we are actually capable as societies to chart a path forward, I think is something I still very much believe in. And there was this question on sort of the domestic challenges as well, and it's true. We're all faced with more polarized public debates, with fragmenting political landscapes and all of that. But even there, I don't know where this is going. We'll discuss the question of how we regulate social platforms. We'll watch how the elections in Hungary will play out in early April, and whether Viktor Orban is still the future of Hungary. Is he? I don't know. I don't know which way the Hungarians will go. I was ambassador in Poland, very polarized politics. In the end, it was not the nationalist, narrow, parochial camp that saw enemies everywhere that won the election. So it's, we have choices that we make. And I think to be aware of those choices is the best a university can provide you with, and it's the best you can do with your own life. So that was very broad now, but
thank you.
You were tempting.
Thank you so much. Well, I would like to thank you for your last question. I think that we still owe you an answer, and we organize more events probably, to actually provide like a more, structure and actually positive answer to your question, which is very legitimate. One of the most striking experience of the last few months teaching here was one of my students. I was sharing, which is something generational that I think we have in common. You were in Washington in 1990 when there was like the collapse of the Soviet Empire, and I was in Sicily, different place. I was 14, but still there was actually the first time actually I made a public presentation at school, and I was sharing with my students this dream we had, the end of a divided Europe, the birth of European integration, the idea of like integration, of trying to coexist, overcome, the burden of history. And I think this was a very positive and strong drive that our generation had. And I think that actually rebuilding, maybe through the cooperation of this good momentum between Italy and Germany, giving momentum to the European Union, bringing back a dream to the students, to the new generation, of the positive, outcome of this unique political technology that is unique, and there is nothing else worldwide. This is actually a privilege we got here. I think this is very important. It's a sort of generational duty that we have for the new generation. So I really hope that you can also one day enjoy and share the same dream that we had back then. Having said that, thank you so much, Ambassador, for being with us. Thank you all for being with us, and stick around and join our events. Thank you.